Hey, I'm Colburn Jones, and today I'm going to be talking about my undergraduate thesis on Disco Elysium. However, I'm not going to be talking about the majority of my thesis. I'm going to leave out a lot of key parts. But rather, today, I'm going to be talking about a very small portion of my discussion that's focused on the implication of Disco Elysium on our reality, the state of the human existence. And that sounds like a lot, but Disco Elysium is a very great game with a very, what I would argue to be a very powerful and a very intentional message. And because of that message, I do think it can have an impact on our lives. I think it's important to talk about Disco Elysium in an academic setting, but I want to share its message through a public setting because I think it's just as important to have these conversations within academia, but also share our findings very easily accessible to the public. With that being said, Disco Elysium is an incredible game, and I don't want to ruin the experience you may have with it. So please know, like, if you're playing the game or you're intending to play it, this is your big spoiler warning. With that being said, let's get into it. When talking about Disco Elysium, I first want to pose a question, and that is, what does a horse, a movie star, and a narcissist have in common? If you thought that they are the same person, you guessed correctly, because in Netflix's BoJack Horseman, they are exactly the same person. And I think BoJack Horseman is a great example of what a trope I would just label simply as a bad protagonist. And this is someone who, the main character of the show is necessarily not a good person. Actually, he's pretty evidently a horrible person. And despite that, we keep rooting for them, and we keep treating them as the main character. They are the protagonist. They're just morally pretty awful. But BoJack Horseman is just one show. It's just one cartoon show about a horse. It's nothing like serious. It's not very realistic or anything like that. We want to have any shows that are like super realistic and have talking about just bad people or anything like that. We have The Sopranos. That's Tony Soprano is definitely not a great guy. He's probably worse than BoJack, I would say, if we had to compare the two. But those are two shows. We don't have any shows like about anything crazy, like an actual supervillain or anything like that, surely. We have Loki. He's a villain. He's a supervillain. He's objectively a bad person. He's evil, hence the supervillain tagline. That's a fantasy world. We don't have anything more realistic about more realistic version of a supervillain, surely. We don't have anything about any criminals or anything like that. We have You. You is a show about a stalker, and so yeah, I would say that's a pretty human equivalent of a supervillain. That's pretty awful. But you know what? He doesn't kill anyone. At least he doesn't kill anyone. We wouldn't have any shows about any type of criminals that kill people, or no shows about a murderer, surely. We have Hannibal, and Hannibal is a murderer, and he's also a cannibal, which is, you can't get very lower than that. So yeah, that's pretty horrible. But you know what? At the end of the day, these are all people. Minus BoJack, that's a horse. But at the end of the day, for the majority, these are all shows about terrible people. We don't have any shows about like the embodiment of evil, like the devil or like Lucifer. We have a show where it's Lucifer. It's about the devil. That's cool. And of course, these are very silly and just kind of goofy examples, but they're popular. And why is that? Why do we want to see this bad protagonist on the screen? And I think that boils down to that a bad protagonist allows us to connect with a fictional narrative on a greater scale. I kind of equate this to what I call the smiley frowny effect. And the smiley frowny effect, shown through this very artful expression, I think can be boiled down to this. If something is true for this horrible, horrible protagonist, shown by the frowny, then surely it is true for us, the viewer, shown by the smiley. If Lucifer himself can find connection and can find grace and can find meaning throughout life, then surely we can, because we're better than Lucifer, we're better than BoJack, we're better than Tony Soprano. I would argue the majority of us are better than those, bad people. And that's why these shows work. If we can see these horrible people still get something out of every season and find meaning out of every season, then we can find meaning in life as well. And I think there's no better example of this than Harry Dubois from Disco Elysium. I'm not going to do an entire overview of Disco Elysium just because that would take hours on end, and there's so many good videos that do that already. But I do want to quickly summarize Harry's character in the brief aspect of the beginning moments of the game. So Harry wakes up, and you don't really know who he is. You eventually wake up as you're kind of detecting about the storyline, but also about Harry's life, that he's waking up from a multiple day-long bender that was so intense and so calculated that it completely wiped his memory. He has no memory of who he was. all he has and all he carries is this intense sense of guilt. And as the player goes throughout the game, they're able to interact with these different characters who kind of give their own telling of Harry's life and their own memories of Harry, things they've said to him, things that Harry's done to them. And unfortunately, he's painting Harry in a very, very honest and very terrible light. We quickly and soon discover that Harry's just an absolutely horrible human being altogether, and that there's no really redeeming qualities in him. And this is only added onto by the game's ending, which is just as grim as the rest of the game, and it's very unsatisfactory, and it's not very rewarding even. Yet, despite that, there's this kind of moment at the end where Harry's giving this huge message of hope, and it's like a kind of almost redemption moment without him really ever deserving it. And we see that throughout the interaction and the appearance of the Enceladine Phasmid. And the Phasmid itself is kind of hard to describe within the game without having played it in its entirety. And the best way to really summarize this is through a turtle example. And let's imagine you've had a pet turtle when you're a kid. And you have this pet turtle, you love this pet turtle, it's awesome, it's cool, it's fun, it rocks. Unfortunately though, this pet turtle kind of goes missing after a few days. And then a few days turns into a few weeks, and a few weeks turns into a month. And very soon your parents are like, all right, maybe Mr. Turtle's not coming back. Maybe he's at a log somewhere, he's all happy, he has his own lake, it's a nice little pond with a little river beside it, and he's just not here. He's gone. There's no way this turtle's going to come back. He's fine, but there's no way this turtle should come back. Yet despite this, Mr. Turtle comes back, and he's here, and he exists, and not only does he exist, he's the same turtle as he was before so many months ago, and here he is on your front porch. It shouldn't be possible. It shouldn't exist. And although that's a very silly example, it connects pretty evidently for what the Phasmid's appearance in this final moment of the game is very similar to. The Phasmid should not exist. The turtle should not come back. Yet they both happen. The Phasmid's appearance it defies everything that the game leads up to. The game makes it very clear it's illogical for the Phasmid to ever appear. Yet it does. And when it does appear, Harry has the chance to not only interact with it, but he has a dialogue with it. And within that dialogue, there's this message of hope. And Harry is given like this very, very clear sign of hope at the end of a game that he's just been painted to be the worst person imaginable. And it's made very clear he does not deserve any of this. And so to kind of understand that message of hope, we first need to understand the Phasmid itself. And what's made very clear about the Phasmid is that it is a very simple being. It has a very simple mind. There's a line of dialogue that says, "There's no mind to speak of. And if there is, it's beyond your imagination. Too simple to be compatible with yours." So here we get this idea that the Hope Turtle, aka the Phasmid, the Insolent Phasmid, is a very much simple being. If it does have a mind, it's definitely not the human mind. It's incredibly simple. And then the Phasmid forever lays on to this sense of its own mind, kind of claiming that that simple mind allows it to have a less painful reality. And it says this in, "I am at the end of a narrow funnel, weightless, so light it only feels like something to be me. In truth, perhaps I'm nothing. I certainly do not have a soul, and if it did, it would never ache." So here we get a kind of clear sense that because of the Phasmid's simple mind, it has a very much different reality from ours. It's a reality that is painless almost. The Phasmid later goes on to say that it does experience some pain, but nothing compared to our own. And we see that contrast later on even here with its state of its reality when it says that few of us can begin to imagine the horror of you, with all creation reflected in your forebrain. It must be like the highest of hells, a kaleidoscope of fire and writhing glass, eternal damnation. So here we get the sense that not only does the Phasmid have a simple reality, it's a reality that is entirely different from Harry's, aka entirely different from the human reality. Because of its simplicity, it has a mostly painless reality, and compared to ours, it's unimaginable. Our reality is eternal damnation. It's horrible. And so we get these two very distinct realities painted, where we have the side of the Phasmids that is very painless and very simple, and we get the side of humans that because of our complexity, it's incredibly painful. And of course, because of this, Harry does not want that reality. He doesn't want all this pain that he's continuously rediscovered throughout the playthrough. Of course he wouldn't want this. And in fact, it's that desire that started the game in the first place. Harry says this. He says, "I've already forgotten the whole world once when I drank too much." So Harry makes it clear here that he forgot the entire world. He tried to make his life more simple to lose that pain. And that's the very beginning of the game. So here we have Harry at the final moments of the game referencing his intent from the very beginning. And so here we get this kind of threat within that Harry was able to completely forget his world, his reality. He forgot everything. That should be scary. The Phasmid should say that that's horrifying, right? But it doesn't. The Phasmid talks about something else entirely and says that the larger threat is not that Harry was able to forget his reality, that there's a threat of a false reality. False reality is based on the concept that we can't always trust our senses, and our senses are how we perceive reality. So for our sense of touch, you may have felt your phone vibrate one time when it really didn't vibrate. You can't always trust what you're hearing, what you're seeing, what you're feeling, and so you can't really trust reality either. We see this even further emphasized in more popular times with the discussion of, does everyone have an internal dialogue or not? Where some people don't have that. They just kind of have thoughts, not really words being spoken in their own head. And we have this very clear sense that we cannot trust how we're really perceiving reality. And also, everyone is perceiving reality differently. And because of that, we can't really make sense of if our reality is true or not. So there's a threat that our reality is entirely false because we all perceive it through our senses and through our own mind. And because reality exists in our mind, there's a potential for reality to only exist in our own mind. And that's the threat here. And the Phasmid says this directly, saying, "So it's already happening. Soon one of you will close your eyes and open them to see that none of this ever existed." So rather than acknowledge the threat of Harry's power of being able to binge drink and completely reduce his reality to nothing, the Phasmid says the real threat to the human condition is the fact that anyone can do that just by a blink of an eye, and that we can accidentally see the entirety of reality turn out to be false, and that everything we know will just slip away and start fading away until we're left with absolutely nothing. And when we blink, we see that nothing has been here and that our entire reality was false. And that's horrifying. But the Phasmid doesn't leave it there. It faces the threat, and it doesn't give a solution to it, but rather it responds with a message of empathy. It says, "That must be incredibly hard. The arthropods are in silent and meaningless, all of you. Know that we are watching. When you're tired, when the vision spins out of control, the insects will be looking on, rooting for you." So despite this entire threat, the Phasmid doesn't fix it. All it says is, hey, we're rooting for you. You have an incomprehensible mind to that of ours, yet despite that, we are rooting for you. And that type of empathy towards Harry, towards all of humans, it goes on. And the Phasmid says, "And when you fall, we will come to raise you up, bud from you, banner-like, blossom from you, and carry you apart in a sky funeral, in honor of your passing. But not me, because I'm just a leaf eater." So here the Phasmid obviously still keeps his very upbeat and very, less painful tone. It's a very happy creature. Yet despite that, it's giving this very deep message of empathy where it's saying, even if you die, even if you fall to the ground, the insects, all of nature will raise you up and still support you. So this type of empathy is not limited to even life. Even after death, nature's rooting for Harry still, despite all the horrible things he's done. And so we get this clear sense that we, the humans, have this threat of a false reality, which is what divides them. And that's really what makes them even more separate than the complex reality we mentioned earlier. And meanwhile, the Phasmid still has this painless and simple reality. And so here we have these two very clearly distinct realities that are only becoming more and more separate as we continue this discussion. Yet despite this, there's now this connection between the two where they're both empathetic towards each other and they have this connection. They're able to talk to each other and share empathy to each other despite these entirely different realities. And we see the strength of this connection here with suddenly another flash of pain, worse than the one before, the taste of blood in your mouth. The insect tastes it too, twitching suddenly. the Phasmid and Harry are able to share a moment of pain together. And granted, Harry bears a pain that the Phasmid will never bear, that of a potential false reality. They're still able to share this pain, this very, very lesser pain, but they're still able to share a very intense connection here, that they're able to share a moment of pain together. And so here, we see that the Phasmid and Harry are able to connect. And we see them connect despite their realities. And most importantly, we see them connect despite the threat that Harry and Harry alone bears, saying that so is already happening. Soon one of you will close your eyes and open them to see that none of this ever existed. That is a threat that only humans bear. The Phasmid doesn't understand that. It can never comprehend that. It just knows its internal damnation. That's all it knows the state of the human mind to have. Yet despite that, the two are able to connect. Despite that threat to Harry's own reality, there's that connection here. And so we see that these two are able to connect despite that big threat. They're also being able to connect despite their differences. This entire game paints Harry as this horrible monster of a human. And now we have this Phasmid who's innocent, who barely experiences pain, never aches, even if it has a soul. And it's very simple and it's very kind. And despite that stark contrast, they're able to connect and have a very long and very passionate and empathetic conversation to each other. And most importantly, they're able to connect despite Harry's differences. All of Harry's past connections have been proven to be this horrible and this damaging thing with all these awful outcomes. Despite that, here's Harry making a new connection that is filled with empathy and this message of hope. And if this is true for Harry, I also think this is true for all of us to each other. We can all form a strong connection despite everything. And those connections bring meaning to life, even if reality is somehow false. So through Disco Elysium's message, it doesn't give us a solution to the human condition of having this issue where our reality exists only in our mind, and we cannot prove if our reality is even true, and our reality may be false. Despite that threat, and despite the differences we all have from each other, we can still connect. And that connection is what gives us meaning. And so we get the sense that all of us are able to do this to each other. No matter the differences, no matter what threats we may face, we can all still connect. Even if reality may be false, that doesn't matter. Because in every reality, we're still able to connect with each other. Within Disco Elysium's ending, it faces a threat that we all face to our own reality. And rather than try to bring a solution to that threat or try to explain why that threat could be happening or try to give any sorts of answers, it says none of that matters because it gives a meaning to our reality. And that meaning is that we are not alone in this threat and that we are not alone in these moments of despair. And even if we have entirely different realities from each other, the beauty is that we're still able to connect. In that beauty, there's meaning for every single reality. Thank you.